All right. So, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. Today, we're talking about how you can learn to be a more inclusive leader. Kelly and I are going to talk about the science, the stories, and everything in between when it comes to inclusion and leadership, and how you learn the skills that will make you more effective in the workplace, and how you can optimize and humanize the workplace for your employees. So we'll start. So this is Sounding Board. Sounding Board helps companies accelerate leadership development with a managed network of world-class coaches. And we do that through a platform that has the power of technology and humans. We provide executive coaching, group coaching, and coaching platform. We kind of basically, our mission is clear and very simple: develop the most impactful leaders in the world. Thank you for introducing us. I'm going to skip the bio slide. I'm going to jump into the agenda. We have 3 agenda items for today: upgrading your leadership skills, and what specifically from the lens of responsibilities that minorities have and should have, upskilling your inclusive leadership capabilities and what is needed strategically and programmatically of talent leaders in today's workplace. And last, we're going to talk about compassionate leadership and how is compassionate leadership interacts with inclusion and inclusive leadership. With that, let's kick it off. So you've probably seen something similar to this or read about how some groups and under-resourced communities have less access to opportunities comparing to other communities. This example of the one to the left is a research study that has been really cited many, many times. And the premise is basically, for white names, when it comes to applying to jobs, they have a higher quality resume. Basically, they're perceived more qualified, or they have more callbacks, up to 30% comparing to other names that have this connotation of African American names. So are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Yes, they get more callbacks, up to 30%. The study to the right is also well cited, and a lot of research papers use this research article to kind of basically dig deeper to understand what's happening when it comes to applying to jobs, not only the behavior of the employer, but also the behavior of the candidate. And we see that women do not apply for jobs unless they are 100% qualified. And they're saying that they apply only if like men apply for jobs when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet 100% of them. So you can see also how self-limiting behaviors that comes from beliefs and perceptions, but also the way they were treated in the past that led to that perception. So it's not only the responsibility, but also the environment that led to this perception, that led to this behavior. Moving forward, this is more recent research about performance at the workplace. So after the candidate is hired, they start working. Now we see problems within the workplace when it comes to promotion. So the broken rung is a term coined by McKinsey and the Lean-In organization, the Workplace Report. They publish this report every year, and they're talking about how only 80% of women are promoted comparing to 100% of men are promoted for the same qualifications. And they're saying that glass ceiling is not the problem per se. It's mainly the symptom of the problem. The problem is the broken rung, which is the first promotion women get after their first entry point to the company. And you can see another research by Kelly Sue at Yale University is talking about the similar concept called gender promotion gap, pretty much the same thing, which is when it comes to comparing performance versus potential of men versus women, we can say that they did this research on probably 30,000 employees in retail, and they found that performance ratings on average are higher for women by 7.3%. But when it comes to potential rating, potential performance, not performance, the current performance, the potential perception about how they're going to perform at a higher level, the next job or next opportunity, their rating is 5.8% lower, even after they got promoted, and also they got promoted, and after they perform a higher level, their potential rating still lower comparing to their male peers.
This makes so much sense to me, Iyad. You spoke briefly about how the environment can kind of shape the behaviors for minorities. And I am a huge, huge, huge like example of that. I spent more than a decade at one job. I know that's almost unheard of, but I kept getting promoted. The money did not follow, but the promotions, they weren't given to me. I had to ask each time. I mean, and it was weird how I was treated when I asked, because I just saw the opportunities and I stepped up immediately to offer. And I learned later that my behavior was perceived as more masculine than feminine, which was why when I did that, I was met with like shock in a way. But I never let it stop me. Hindsight, would not have stayed at one organization that long, severely limited my earning potential, even though I kept getting learning opportunities and new promotions. But we all know that's not the full picture now, don't we?
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing, Kelly. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just, it's very interesting, but also sad to see kind of companies still not able to dig deeper, understand why this is happening, and take serious actions based on this awareness. Maybe kind of also from the same report, we can talk about what is happening on a larger kind of level. So basically, when you think about a pipeline of promotion, you think about what's happening when people start their careers. Even if they have this disadvantage early on, like right off the bat when they enter the organization, and keep the accumulative disadvantage happening every level they go up in the ladder. You can see here the women of color specifically, they're in a serious disadvantageous place, where you have the entry level like 17% comparing to 35% of white men, but similar to men of color, if you can see the numbers, compared to white women, pretty much kind of it's like 50% of the percentage, the top of the funnel. But when you go up in the ladder, you keep moving forward to the right, you can see a C-suite level. You can see only 4% representation of women of color. This is the largest data set ever been studied by McKinsey and Lean In, and this is the same report. It's been published since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see here that when we talk about representation of women and women of color, you can see why this is happening and where the problem's happening. Look at the dip between entry level and manager from 17% to 12%, and keep going lower and lower. So now we know this, and kind of we understand to a point that the workplace is not treating this same groups for the same qualifications the same way. That will lead us to kind of one perception, is that, okay, we need to do something about it, and employers need to do something about it. Before we talk about this, let's talk about one angle that is rarely studied or rarely been talking about, which is the responsibilities of women of color, specifically women of color, because they are in the, if you can see, the lowest representation when it comes to leadership positions. Before we talk about that, Google shared this interesting way to think about representation why 1% variance in performance scores, we just talked about it, the lowest level, the L1, how that is going to impact the more you go up in the higher. It's just like a double clicking on the same chart. And you can see here to the right here, 1% change will lead to 35% comparing to 65% representation. So imagine the lowest level, L1, is the entry level. Level 2 is like a junior. Level 3 is, manager. 4, senior. L5 is director, all the way to L8. 35% representation of women comparing to 65% of male. That's because 1% of variance happened at the lowest level. So yeah, numbers matter here. Now, back to the angle we wanted to talk about is our premise for when it's coming kind of basically to kind of how we change the workplace, we're taking a slightly different angle. Instead of talking about the rights, we understand the problem, we're building our kind of model of responsibilities on one really kind of well-known quote. Kelly, maybe kind of you use it here, kind of the way you talk about it, I really get kind of inspired every time you talk about it here.
Well, I think this quote, Shirley Chisholm, for those of you who don't know, was an African-American politician. She has passed many years ago, but I think she was the first to ascend to a seat in the House of Representatives. I could be completely misremembering that. But the point of this is you won't be given an opportunity. Sometimes you have to make your own opportunity. And that's what this refers to, this folding chair image. Now, a lot of times, well, a lot of opportunities these days, minorities and women of color, they don't even want to be at the table, which is why people are leaving. Another reason for the Great Resignation is not just to start a new job, but to start your own business, because we're tired of having to ask for a seat at the table or bring in our own folding chair, because there's something implied there, right? Iyad, if like you have to bring your own chair, that means you weren't requested, you weren't wanted, you weren't, they're not including you, you're not being made comfortable. And so, this is something that talent leaders really have to consider. It's like, that's the whole point of inclusion, not just that you have this representation, but that you make it easy and accessible for them to contribute at a high level. And, I know I have not always been given that comfort. Fortunately for me, she doesn't suffer from low self-esteem or lack of confidence. So I just go in and do what I want. And if I can't do it, I'll figure out another way. But a lot of people don't think like that or behave like that, which is too bad. I think things might change if they did.
No, yeah, you're right. I love it. Love it. Wanted maybe to kind of translate this quote into kind of 7, consider them pillars or steps or mindsets, the way you want to see them. Not going to talk about all of them, and kind of choose 2 that really resonated with me. Number 1 is find transformative allies. This is really, really important when it comes to growing within organizations. Having mentors is awesome. Having coaches is great. We're a leadership coaching company, but also is very important to think about finding sponsors within organizations. Allies could have different, roles within your organization, and go and find them. Find those, not any allies, find those who are transformative allies. Basically, when it comes to kind of growing within organizations, people who can advocate for you, people who can share your story, people who can remind you that you're not only have pain, but also you have power. These are things that can also propel you forward and make you tap into opportunities that you would think that you will never get. So the importance of allies is growing, and highly recommend doubling down on the idea of transformative allies. Those who are challenge you, not only support you, people who advocate for you and at the same time hold you accountable toward your achievement and goals. The second one I really care about is, and maybe I can get back to you, Kelly, is about crushing imposter syndrome. We're all going to have some imposter syndrome in a way or another, especially when you join a new organization. It's normal, it's part of the process. And some people say embrace, some people say crush, some people be aware of. Imposter syndrome is basically happens when you think you're not fit for this organization, and people will discover that you're not what you're not fit for this organization in terms of qualifications. This is normal. I would consider these feelings as data and try to process them in a way that you care about the organization, you care about your development and growth. I'll embrace this by using this energy to fuel my growth and development and learn more. It's normal part of the process, and it's going to go away after like 60, 90 days after you embed yourself within the organization. Back to you, Kelly.
Yeah, you said some really interesting things. The power of allies, but not giving up the power of yourself. Then you talked about accountability, and you talked about crushing, moving, whatever adjective or verb you choose to execute with regard to imposter syndrome. Just get rid of it. I think that imposter syndrome it's very interesting in that it's entirely self-generated. It has no basis in reality, and a lot of times it's weird because the things that you're scared of end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy because that insecurity manifests in your behavior. So if you think, oh, I'm not qualified, oh, I'm stupid, oh, I can't do it, oh, they're going to realize that I don't know what I'm talking about, then you have a tendency to act the way that you're thinking. So you have to be careful what thoughts power your actions, because you will end up behaving a certain way, even if it's not technically true. I think it goes back to those numbers that you quoted earlier, Iyad, when you said a man will apply for a job when he's only 60% qualified, whereas a woman will wait until she can check every box on the job description before she even tries her hand. And we have to behave differently, I think, as women and minorities a lot of times, because that 60% versus 100%, I like to think of that 40% not as what's missing, but as an opportunity for growth. So let go of perfectionist tendencies, let go of feeling the need to have everything all one way if you're a minority because, you're worried about this or that. Perfection does not exist. And fear, there's a wonderful acronym, false evidence appearing real. I'm big on quotes and jazzy little things like that, but there's some truth to that. You have to act as though you belong there, because you do. You're no different, no worse, no better than anybody else. And that equal playing field in your mind will translate to an equal playing field in your workplace. And if it doesn't, then it stands to reason you're in the wrong place and you may need to find a new one.
I love that. Wow. This is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Awesome. All right. So before we move forward to part 2 of this conversation and talk about the inclusive leadership capabilities and how to upskill leaders, any questions before we move forward?
Sorry about that, Iyad. I had myself muted. I do have a question from a participant in the audience, and I was trying to get a little bit more info on which slide this was related to, but it may just come to you when I read you the question, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Anna asked the question, and it was about 5 minutes ago, if you can kind of figure which slide you were on, but the question was, do you see this difference only between gender and color, or also with other minorities? And can you talk a bit about it?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question. Probably, I'm assuming this is where here. I think just that when it comes to inequality and lack of consistency across the board when it comes to performance versus potential, most research data I've seen so far has to do with either race or gender or the intersection of these two identities. I have less knowledge, to be honest, and less access to other research papers when it comes to other identities. Could be sexual orientation, religion, could be other identities as well. But happy to kind of dig deeper and share more after the presentation, if we can have like a resources, if I can find that.
That's great, Iyad. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so part two. All right, how can talent leaders upskill inclusive leadership capabilities, and what is needed strategically and programmatically? So before we talk about leadership and inclusive leadership, maybe just some quick, revisit of the definition of inclusion. Now, today is not about diversity, equity, and inclusion per se, but more about inclusive leadership and how we can upskill leaders. But it doesn't hurt if we just maybe align on one definition, or at least the definition we came up or we found that it's the fit for this conversation. So if you think about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, and you can also add more equality, you can add justice, you can add a lot of other things, but these are the most common ones. Diversity, especially today, it's more like a fact. It's happening. If you're not talking about demographic diversity, which is, I think recent research studies showed that the new generation is going to be the first generation where you have more non-white groups, more larger than white, 53%, if I'm not mistaken. So Generation Z, the new generation, is pretty much for them, diversity on this demographic layer is a fact. It's happening. So it's not the goal anymore to have like diverse population or diverse groups or teams. None of that anymore. This is basically the environment that we live in. Now, if we dig deeper and talk about deeper level of diversity and why diversity matters on a deeper level, that we're talking about identities and way of thinking and neurodiversity. This is why innovation happens, not only because we think about diversity as from an ethical and social justice lens, but also from a business perspective as well. Now, not talk about belonging and equity for today, but focusing specifically on inclusion, but they all interact in a way or another. Inclusion and belonging, one can lead to the other one, and equity is on a totally different level. So inclusion is the action that you do. So think about diversity is the environment, inclusion is the action you do. So being part of a group, involved, integrated, you feel included because there is an inclusive behavior that was intentionally or unintentionally. It's an action that led to that inclusion behavior. If you think about belonging and equity are the results of inclusion. So belonging basically is an emotion, it's a feeling that you feel being accepted with your authentic and diverse identity. You can bring your uniqueness, unique identity. If you can go back to this slide of twice as good, the first one is identity. Your identity is your magic, and this is exactly belonging, is the premise of I can bring my unique identity to work, and the identity I want to bring to work. You don't have to bring your whole self, by the way. You can bring the self you want to bring to the organization, and you don't feel that you're judged or evaluated, or what they call it in psychology, evaluation apprehension. I feel like people will judge you based on who you are. So the sense of belonging is nurtured within organizations as a result of active inclusion. Equity, on the other hand, is more the system. Fairness is on. You can feel that you belong to the organization that you're part of, but you're not necessarily paid the same way that other people are paid, or same level. It's more on a system level. So this is like a goal that we need to invest and dig deeper and find it from a holistic perspective, not only from an interactional perspective.
It is so, so important to understand these definitions because, as an inclusive leader, you need to know when someone is perverting them or using them incorrectly to your detriment as a leader or to the detriment of the people that you lead. Just like Iyad, you pointed out, diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an action that you take, and it leads to these other higher level things like belonging and, more importantly, organizational equity. It is so, so easy for, senior leaders in particular to take the stance, well, this is a very diverse organization, period, as though that's all. No, that's just the fact of the matter. The world is an increasingly diverse place, as is the workplace. However, diversity does not guarantee inclusion. Therefore, it is a higher level of responsibility that leaders must be held accountable for to create that environment, to encourage, promote, and reward those inclusive behaviors, and to encourage accountability. And where the behaviors are not happening organically, to provide resources like leadership coaching, for instance, to shape, build, and, really create those inclusive leaders who are going to have organizational impact, not only on the business, but on the workforce, recruiting, retention, engagement, et cetera.
100%. Yeah, totally. The more we align on these terms, and we'll find later in the conversation, the more confidence you get as a leader, and your confidence is going to fuel your competence, and your competence is going to fuel your commitment toward creating a humane workplace. So you can break this cycle just by educating yourself a bit more about what is this and what is that and how they're different and how they overlap. So we promise that this is not going to be us talking at you, but more talking with you. So we would like to pause and reflect and ask you a couple of questions here that we can learn from you about your own experience and your story. So the first question here, think about a time when you experienced a situation with someone who wasn't leading inclusively. How did you feel?
I'm going to kick us off if I could, Iyad. I had a boss, nice guy, which means nothing in hindsight when you're not being treated appropriately. But I always, and see, this is just being young. You don't always know what you don't know until later, and you can put a name to a behavior. You can call a thing what it is. I didn't realize what was wrong in how this man treated me until I heard how he spoke about his wife. Now, I knew his wife was a very accomplished woman. She was very big in the hospitality industry and had kind of left her job in order to take care of their children. And he spoke to her in front of other people. It was almost like she had a tail. She was a child or something. And I said, and it clicked in my mind. It was like a light bulb moment. And I realized he doesn't really respect women. So he really had a problem with yours truly, because
wow.
all those limitations that, sometimes women put on themselves. I've never done that because I was taught to fight for whatever I wanted, right? Yeah. And I thought nothing of, ceding to his need for comfort if it did not align with what I felt I was deserving of. So totally. But you never know what's not inclusive or what is inclusive until you see what isn't inclusive.
Wow. This is profound. Yeah, absolutely. Because we learn by contrast. Like sometimes you don't know you're inside the cage unless if you experience freedom, right? Same thing with inclusion and exclusion. You don't know that it's your right sometimes to feel included.
Right. I remember. Look at this: alone, frustrated, unimportant, uncomfortable. That uncomfortable and frustrated, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and think about, these are just feelings, not just feelings. These are feelings, the most important thing. But think about the behavior that would follow this.
Or the lack of behavior that won't follow it, a la promotions, raises, learning opportunities, etc.
Absolutely. How can you tap into your power if you feel alone, unimportant, frustrated? You're, I call it catabolic energy, right? Like you pretty much, you withdraw, or you in an anger mode, or it just basically that's not pleasant. And
Right. You can't perform. You can't perform. Ugh.
Exactly. Either you're disengaged, like basically you feel you can still work, but you're not part of the organization anymore, or you leave the organization. And a lot of people say, well, why? Like, imagine if you're performing, you're doing the work you want to do, and you're part of the team, and you are paid, and everything is awesome, but this happens to you. You don't feel included immediately. It's like you forget about everything, and you feel frustrated and uncomfortable.
And look at this: discouraged, hurt, disgusted, annoyed, shattering, undervalued. I mean, all of these negative things. This is why it is so important to have inclusive leaders, because if your workforce is experiencing this type of feeling, their performance is not going to be high. Their discretionary effort will be low. Their level of engagement will be low. And this is, like you said, one of the key things that contributed or is contributing to the Great Resignation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to add from neuroscience perspective, that we all kind of experience, we know the fight or flight mode, or freeze or appease. These things like happen. It's like basically when you are not included, your brain doesn't distinguish between physical threats or social threat or any kind of threat. Threat is threat. So if you're using your prefrontal cortex, your high executive functions to do high complex task or projects, the moment you feel excluded, immediately you shut down, you go back to the fight flight mode. It was called amygdala hijack, and you're in a threat mode, right? Exactly. These feelings come up and show up. And as we know, fear is way stronger than curiosity, stronger than a lot of other things. So imagine why people would, just from a neuroscience perspective, knowing what this is happening in your brain.
And what happens then when they shut down? Then they boot up a new window and start looking for a new job.
Exactly. It's actually a really good question for futures. They kind of say, what behaviors would you do? Yeah. All right. So moving to the next question is now shifting in perspective. Think about a time when you experienced a situation with someone who was leading inclusively. How did you feel?
I'm going to kick us off again, because this actually gives me an opportunity to talk about sounding board. I did not realize until I joined this organization, and this is going to sound like, it's not truthful, but I promise I'm not the type of person to just toot a horn for the sake of tooting it. This is 100% genuine. I really did not know what a good leader was until I got to this organization. I'm going to give a shout out to my boss, Kip Kelly.
Oh,
White man, but it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. And that may sound funny, but when you are a Black woman and you have navigated through, I'm going to go ahead and say my age, several decades of being in the workforce, you don't always assume that a white man is going to treat you fairly. And I really did not realize what inclusive leadership was until I joined his team. He recruited me. We had worked together years ago, and he sought me out when he had an opportunity. And it was literally, this has been the best work environment I have ever had. I have only worked at this company for a few months, and I've learned more. And I feel as though I've evolved, not just as, a content expert, but as a person, because his entire team, the culture of this organization is all about inclusion. And I don't just mean race or gender, although I've never seen an organization that's this diverse in my entire life. And I believe it's happening completely organically, which is phenomenal. But it's also about diversity of thought, diversity of experience. And that level of inclusion is so powerful when it comes to discretionary effort. I mean, we're a startup. We're moving lightning fast. Some things are not even built before we're out here doing whatever we got to do with these things. And everybody's all in. And that's because of the culture. And the culture is what it is because the leaders are inclusive and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. and setting the example for everyone else to follow.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing. Wow. Look at this. Well, people
Valued, motivated. Yeah. Yes. Empowered. Look, I see content, my favorite thing. Supported and heard. Oh, good stuff in here, Yad.
My gosh, valued, motivated. Yeah, I don't know why common sense is not common, but
That's
this
my
is
favorite phrase. It's not. It's not. Absolutely not. Because what is inclusive leadership after all? I've heard so many people say, you learned all of these things in kindergarten. Share, listen, don't take other people's toys, treat everyone the way you want to be treated. Now, if those aren't foundational inclusive leadership qualities, I don't know what is. But that common sense is not common.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll make it common by definitely kind of one piece of science at a time, one story at a time, one person to influence at a time. That's kind of why we're here. It just sometimes we were too much involved in day-to-day activities that we forget the ABC of human interactions. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I learned a lot about you today, Kelly. So thank you.
Probably too much, right?
No, there's no too much here. Cool. All right. Now let's do some science stuff. So this is a model I built for my dissertation and my research work that helped me kind of pretty much in so many ways. And it helped me for leadership development, helped me for inclusive leadership, helped me for adaptive leadership, helped me for a lot of things. Just to see the world from a spectrum perspective and shades, and not like black and white or on and off or yes or no. It gives me this, more tools to kind of navigate through the world of fairness, equity, belonging. So, and you can use it the way you want, basically. So think about backward design here. Think about what are we trying to achieve at the workplace? Like specifically, if we're talking about the environment is the workplace, think about two main outcomes: effectiveness and well-being. We're talking about effectiveness, market share, growth of the organization, team performance, productivity, all these things, right? Team level, individual level, or organizational level. And now think about also humans as humans, and think about the well-being of humans. Now, in the past, well-being was used to be a tool for effectiveness, but moving towards more, today's workplace, and this is not working anymore. To think about well-being as a tool, well-being is actually an outcome. So think about well-being as humanizing the workplace, effectiveness as to optimize the workplace. And they work together. You cannot have well-being without effectiveness, or effectiveness without well-being. It's just like it together. They glue the organization. And to achieve that, you need effective leadership. That's why I joined Sounding Board. It's all about leadership development, leadership upskilling, leadership platform, leadership coaching. Because in order to achieve well-being and effectiveness, you need a leadership operating system within your organization. You need a high-level leadership impact within your organization. It's like the tipping point. Once you invest in leadership, that will impact the whole organization. Now, how do we achieve effective leadership? I think about it in two different ways. There is the environmental role, the structure, and there is the individual role, the person, the human, right? Now, if we double click on each one of them, that will lead us to understand what exactly happening with each one of them: environmental design and individual behavior. And these are things I chose for today's conversation. In order to think about environment, you have to think about basic psychological needs. One of the theories we can share later is self-determination theories. Humans need three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, relatedness. They need to have a space to experiment. They have their own sense of agency. They need to grow and develop and move forward in their career. And also they need sense of community and relate to other people. They need equity. That's where we talked about equitable systems. They need support and accountability. This is like what everyone wants. I need to be challenged, but also this coming from a place of care. Now, if you provide all these in your organization, in the environment, that's not enough, actually. Individuals have to have their own ownership and responsibility and accountability when it comes to activating their power, their effective leadership. That's why we started the presentation with like, you have to grab the chair. This is where you grab the chair. The behaviors you have to do, the behaviors you should hold yourself to account. We as Sounding Board, we think about mindset as a way to activate the behaviors. Also the behaviors, when it comes to inclusive leadership for this specific context, they have their own way of interacting with each other. So what we're going to talk next about behaviors related to effective leadership within the workplace when it comes to inclusive leadership. And this is the model of today. Not my model, I wish. It's by Burke et al. And they share this in so many outlets, Deloitte, at Harvard Business Review. And I found this model is really actually science. The science behind it is solid, but also very easy to follow. So they call this 6C model, which is curiosity, cultural intelligence, collaboration, commitment, courage, and cognizance. And you can see here their traits and behaviors, not necessarily just behaviors, but also a way to think about things, and has to do with your own cognitive processing of situations and problem solving. So this is where I think if you use this framework as a way to see the problem, analyze the problem, synthesize the data that comes out of analyzing the problem, then that will give you extra tools to be more inclusive leader. So maybe talk just quickly about each one of them. And they're kind of self-explanatory, but it doesn't hurt if we just talk about kind of at least two or three. So maybe let's talk about my favorite, commitment. So articulating authentic commitment toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. When leaders exert these behaviors, when they show these behaviors, especially leaders, we're talking about not only leaders from a trade perspective, but also leaders as positions within the company, like executives and C-suite. You basically opening up horizons within the middle managers' minds, and they see a model to follow. Actually, managers learn within organizations by following their leaders. So sense of commitment is cascaded down pretty much to everyone in the organization if it's coming from the top leaders within the organization. So when you challenge the status quo, you hold others accountable and make diversity and inclusion a personal priority, that will create a culture of commitment within the organization. So when you think about inclusion, number one thing, think about it is, if you're a leader and you are a leader, you not necessarily have to have a position within the company. You're a leader as a change agent within meetings, within projects, wherever you go within the organization today, you're a leader. When you listen, you're a leader. So when you show commitment as one of your values within the organization, you're contributing to inclusive leadership within your organization. It's not you have it or you don't have it. Think about it as a spectrum. If I evaluate myself on commitment when it comes to creating a diverse, inclusive environment from 1 to 5, I would give myself 3. First thing that comes to mind is, what is 4? Why didn't I give myself 2? And this is where you start reflection and you move to cognizance, self-awareness, self-evaluation, asking for feedback, not assuming less or asking more. And that will lead to more confidence. Confidence will lead to more courage. Courage will lead to more curiosity and asking more questions, which leads to more competence, which is cultural intelligence. So you can see here, this model is not sequential, it's more like a circle, because one can lead to the other one. And I highly recommend that just take a seconds now to think about which one of these resonates the most with me, which one I feel like is my superpower, which one I think I need to do more of. And that will lead us to a scenario I wanted to share with you. All right. So this scenario, basically hypothetical. Garrett is Julie's direct supervisor. He feels uncomfortable having conversations with her beyond simple small talk. She's new to the department and the only woman on the team. He doesn't want to accidentally say the wrong thing or offend her. He feels like he could easily or advertently say something insensitive. Now,
Oh, wow. Yeah, this one. You might look at this one and say, oh, well, yeah, that since me too. No, this is before me too. This is still right now. Hashtag right now, not hashtag me too. When I look at this scenario, I can't help but think how often this exact same scenario has prevented me from getting valuable feedback that would have not only enhanced my learning and my performance, but the lack of that learning and feedback denied me having a more collaborative learning, or working relationship, with a leader who did not, engage on this level.
yeah, totally. Now, if you think about this scenario, think about yourself as an inclusive leader, and Garrett came to you and say, "Hey, I need your help. What do you help me? How can you help me?" Before knowing about the inclusive leadership model that we just shared, what is your first reaction? What would you say? Take seconds to think about it. Now, I want you to use this lens. You could either write in the chat or just in your head, which one of these, or more than one, you think Garrett can up-level his behavior when it comes to inclusive leadership.
I'm going to shout out one. Can I shout out one, Iyad?
Absolutely.
Courage. Garrett needs courage, man. He needs to get himself together, and he needs to go to that woman and say, listen, Julie, I think this, and this, but just start with the positive. Julie, your performance is excellent, this and that. I loved how you spoke up about this in the meeting the other day. However, I've noticed X. And it works just that easy. Lovely.
Wow. Amazing. So I like that. I agree with you. I don't see a problem with commitment, because there's feeling there. He feels that there is sense of commitment, right? So more like how to tap into another leadership trait that can help him be more as an inclusive leader.
Yeah.
Lovely. Awesome. So imagine scenarios, what's happening with you personally, or what's happening in your organization, and how can you use this model? It's a model, it's not, everything, but how can you use this model to see the world from different lenses, different perspectives, shades, and where to double down, where to slow down, where to scale, where to start, where to stop. All these things can help you one by one, step by step, creating more inclusive organizations. All right, so last part is very short, and it's about compassionate leadership. Compassionate leadership is an area of research that I haven't seen a lot of research papers about. Less about inclusive leadership, where I found some research papers, but compassionate leadership is more still by practice and less by research. But that doesn't mean that there are not a lot of models out there that we can use. This is by NNG, Norman Nelson Group, very well-known organization in UX and user experience. And I really like this model. I use it all the time. The difference between pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Think about sympathy is that you feel for someone, like there are feelings toward that person, and there's like more emotions. Now, empathy is a little bit higher. It's a combination of feeling and cognitive processing. When you feel with someone, you see the world from their perspective. You put yourself in their shoes. Compassion takes it even a level higher. Compassion is empathy plus action. Think about it this way. Empathy is more cognitive and feeling, not necessarily action-oriented. Compassion is empathy plus action, when you have bias for action. When we talked about transformative allies, think about compassionate leaders. And this is where I feel like this is an area of research that we can do more of, and how this would interact with inclusive leadership. Now, what is action here? So we understand empathy, we understand compassion, that is empathy plus action, but let's double click on action. So I found this really cool model, the one to the left, research paper published recently, and it's talking about the behaviors of compassionate leaders. And they're talking about integrity, accountability, presence, authenticity, and dignity. And these are not just like, we all know these values, they're all awesome. We wish we have them all the time and use them as, our operating system. But think about them also as behaviors and skills that the more you do reps of, right? Like the more repetitions, the more you become more confident and competent in doing them. So empathy plus all these things will lead to compassionate leadership. We talked a little bit before about inclusive leadership, the 6C model. How these together interact, I will leave it to your own curiosity. I didn't find any research whatsoever about the overlap or the interaction between inclusion and compassion when it comes to leadership development, but I decided to put it today as a way to think about it, as a question for you. How does compassionate leadership can lead to inclusive leadership, or vice versa? Maybe you can put in the chat the first thing that comes to mind. This is where I would like you to leave today, that compassionate leadership and inclusive leadership are both needed within the organization, and both can lead to optimizing and humanizing. There are skills and behaviors. They're not labels we put on people. They are things that if we double down on, their journeys, if we embark on, can lead to better workplaces. So these are my final thoughts and takeaways from today's conversation. Would love to hear your thoughts as well. Maybe one word to describe your feeling, one takeaway, and one commitment.
And unfortunately, it looks like we are almost out of time, but hopefully, if you put your questions in the chat, Iyad, I'm going to speak for you and volunteer you to answer a few of them, and we'll follow up later.
Sure, absolutely.
Do you want me to throw one out while folks are working on the Wordle here?
Oh, yeah, great.
Okay. Yeah, so there was a question here. Great, I think, really scenario-based question. What would a junior employee, I like that was labeled like that, because Kelly, you've talked about, as you've come up the ranks and you've been educated and kind of speak up for yourself, and you've done all of those right things, but not everybody does. I mean, not that right. Not everybody right. does, but they just may not have that experience or that confidence or courage. So I thought this was really a great way to ask it. How would a junior employee reveal challenges to a know-it-all boss without raising eyebrows? Interesting.
Tough question.
It's good tough and yeah.
Good question. Iyad, I'll let you take that one.
So how can you challenge a boss without raising?
That maybe is like probably when I think of know-it-all, like kind of probably somebody, maybe ego is involved and doesn't
may not be listening.
Yes.
Listen, yep. How can you? Oh, you got to finesse the situation. But see that the problem is this is a junior employee. Yes. So they don't have the experience. Yes. They may not know how to finesse it. And sometimes, you got to evaluate, is the juice worth the squeeze? But I'm not Iyad. I should be quiet. Go ahead, Iyad.
Well, there are two things I can say as like prerequisites. All right. One prerequisite is the environment, the psychological safety within the organization. Challenging leaders, challenging status quo is the highest level of psychological safety. So it starts with inclusion safety, goes to learning safety when you ask questions that you don't feel like people will judge you based on these questions, right? When you're learning, especially during onboarding, then that will lead you to a higher level of psychological safety, which is contribution safety, the psychological safety. Last one is challenging safety. So think about the organization, assessing the organization. Observation is where is the organization right now? And what the kind of leaders and what kind of safety they're providing, the clues, the social clues, the kind of the micro, messages and all that. The second point, which is really important, is changing, or the prerequisite, changing your mindset about challenging. I don't believe in challenging, honestly. The mindset of a junior employee that they want to challenge a leader about something, think about it this way. Challenging means I win, you lose in this argument. How about shifting this mindset from I win, you win in this conversation? And it's more about a problem-solving conversation than you challenge me, I challenge you, and someone will leave upset, So this is what I think about it, is changing the mindset and assessing the safety within the organization.
Yeah, that's what I meant by, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because you can tell, you're self-aware, you're intelligent enough to evaluate, is this person going to be receptive to what I'm going to say? Or am I opening a can of worms that will ultimately end up damaging me? Because sometimes you have to button your lip, and you have to look out for yourself. If you're not in that safe environment that Iyad just described, and your behavior won't be received well. Whereas, in a more inclusive environment, challenging, questioning, introducing new lines of thought, those things are acceptable, but that's not always the scenario.
Exactly. 100%.
So good. We're tailing, we're hopping a little bit into overtime here, but I wanted you all to have an opportunity, if you wanted to look at the responses that have come back from these polls.
Oh, wow. Nice. I'm excited too.
Good, motivated, encouraged. How wonderful. So glad to hear that, because this is, we appreciate your time today. And courage. Yes. Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for your time and for your honesty.
Yeah, I think you both, first of all, you both have such great, you're both great storytellers, as I read in your description. So thank you for that. I know it's easier for us to learn for a lot of us to learn when there's a story associated. So that's great. Yeah, these are wonderful. What great responses to see from your talent that you shared with us. So thank you to the both of you. We could not do these webcasts without your talent, your knowledge, and your confidence. And Iyad was a little
stand behind Iyad and do what he tells me,
Yeah, and I was going to say,
do what he says. It all works out.
And Iyad was feeling a little under the weather, but Iyad, you did a wonderful. You hung in there with us. So, gosh, we value for being on with us here today. And yes, we will get any questions you all to our participant group. If we did not get to any of those questions, we'll get those sent in. I just want to close out here, folks. Thanks again for hanging on with us just for a little bit longer here. It was worth every minute. But just as a reminder to the HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the Transcript tab. While you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, virtual conferences, premium memberships, and much more. I, of course, would like to say one more thank you to both Kelly and Iyad. Again, a wonderful, wonderful time spent with you all, and to the good people at Sounding Board. And of course, to you all, our webcast viewers, we certainly couldn't do it without you. Thank you for spending this hour with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.